We just saw the power outage in Spain, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
what happens if AI is in the banking sector and it just suddenly, collapses or takes over? All right. Hi, I'm Frank Van. I'm co-founder at Frontier One, a leading sovereign AI specialist working to bring AI to sovereigns in frontier markets around the world: Asia, Latin America, Middle East, Africa. And also working very closely with Nebius, which is one of the, if not the leading AI cloud infrastructure providers in the world. And very excited to be working with both of those companies and opportunities. And secondly, how do I take my coffee? I take my coffee, I have 3 cups in front of me. All of them are Americanos with oat milk, usually, in them. There's occasionally a cappuccino or a flat white may sneak in to that as well. It's a fairly flexible option.
We wanted to talk about sovereign AI, so I brought you here. I think you know a thing or two about it. You've been having a lot of conversations. Let's just get into it. Why sovereign AI?
Sure. Well, I think let's start with the market itself in AI, right? So I've had a long history in AI, right back from being on the board of Siri in 2009, when no one in Silicon Valley cared less about AI. I mean, really didn't. And it was so interesting. And then, when I was working for a major family office out of Hong Kong, Horizon Ventures, and we invested early into DeepMind as well, which was 2011, I think, when we did that. So extremely early. And, it was like, how do you pick those opportunities? How do you see those trends happening? And I think over the years, just working globally in so many different markets, I've been in Hong Kong and Singapore and Silicon Valley and London, everywhere, you get a feel for things, and you get a feel for how things are happening and the way trends are moving. And I think the way the market is super interesting. So you have the US, and the US is, from an AI perspective, it's all about the hyperscalers, right? So you have the big guys who are providing the GPU cloud infrastructure, like Nebius, for instance, and CoreWeave. And then, of course, they're providing that to their major customers are OpenAI, the hyperscalers, right? And also very, very heavily funded AI startups, right?
Yeah.
So in the US, customers of all these massive AI data centers and are effectively the big hyperscalers, right? Because that's where the money is. Like, there's $1 trillion that's gone into AI in the US in terms of investments. Outside of the US, it is a totally different picture, right? In Europe, it's like, how much is that? What, $10 billion, I think, last year was invested into AI startups. It's a fraction of the spend, right? So where is the AI compute? Where are the AI opportunities? And, I've been looking at this for, a couple of years, and really NVIDIA, to be honest, picked this early. They saw that Jensen has been extremely, extremely keen on the sovereign AI element, because he saw that effectively, if I'm a government and I want to deploy AI into a model, right? I want to put my data, my defense data, my finance data, my agriculture data, my health data into a model. That data cannot go to the US. It cannot go to China. It cannot go to my neighbor. It has to be in my country. It has to be localized. And no one was prepared for this. AWS is not prepared to be a local player. AWS is a regional player. I have a hub. I use the AWS. It's either I use the German hub or I use the
US.
US or the Irish hub. But nothing has been this localized ever. And suddenly localization, and suddenly as well, the recent developments in the US around, from a political viewpoint, have forced countries to go, we cannot rely on the US. We can obviously must be wary of China. We must be wary of all these big players. So we have to look out for ourselves. And so, but what do we do? And that's where it's become extreme national priority to have AI implementations, because I have to do it local, and I have to put my data in there, and I have to make it secure I have to have localized models, localized applications, etc. And so sovereign AI has gone from a small thing to suddenly be one of the biggest implementations, I think, of AI from a rest of the world market outside of the US.
Yeah, it feels like it is something though that is like you're steering a gigantic cargo ship in a way because it takes so much to stand up these data centers. But I don't know, maybe you're the guy on the inside. How long term are we thinking here? And I know everybody's scrambling, but it's not like you can just turn a data center on from nothing.
Well, yes and no. It depends on the size and depends on what it's going to do. So if I'm like, a market like France or something, and I want to have the latest Blackwell chips from NVIDIA. So I'm going to need state of the art, liquid cooled, state of the art data center, right? Then that needs to be from the ground up. There are very few data centers, if any, in Europe who are ready for that. Just a few. Obviously, Nebius being one of them, right? Who are by far like probably leading in the ability to do that. Two, can I even get hold of those chips, right? So even if I'm going to build that state of the art data center, can I get hold of them? And again, I'm going to need a partner, like a Nebius or CoreWeave or someone to do that who has NVIDIA backing very strong.
Yeah. And to just rack them and to figure out how to plug them all together. All the wires, where do they go?
Yeah,
What did the box look like?
right. And the sophisticated sort of, you know, cloud management, Kubernetes, Docker type management that they have on top for managing all those different chips, because they don't just have Blackwell, they go all the way down different types of chips for different usage cases. But what's interesting though is in other markets, so let's say Indonesia. So Indonesia were like, okay, they were very smart, I think. They worked with Nebius and they were like, okay, look, we don't need Blackwell chips. We're probably going to need H200s. H100s are fine, right? And what they did is the government there said, okay, we're going to work with Hutch Indo, which is the major telecom provider there. We're going to take one of their existing data centers and we're going to repurpose that. So we're going to upgrade that so it can take the chips that it's capable of taking, and NVIDIA did that work, and we'll get it up and running. We'll put a local model on top, applications in space, and it took them 4 months to put it up and running.
Wow.
Right, so I'm looking at an 18 to 2-year period if I'm gonna try a massive liquid-cooled 100, 200 megawatt facility. But if I'm just putting up a 5 to 10 megawatt facility, with, like, chips that are suitable for the needs that I have, and to be honest, like, probably mostly inference, not so much the modeling,
I was gonna say that. Yeah.
then, yeah, I mean, there's really different ways of doing things. So it's, yes and no, depends on the size and scale of what you're trying to do.
What are different countries' ways of approaching this, and how do they differ?
Yeah, so, Indonesia and, the Philippines or, Morocco, et cetera, all these markets that we at Frontier One are working with. So we're basically what we call sovereign AI specialists, right? So we will work with governments on a local level to figure out what their needs are. And it's very local because you'll have to have a local company, you'll be using local talent, you have to bring in the partners, but still they will have to go through a local company that is and very close in tune with the government and the corporates on the ground, right?
Yeah.
So each market says, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to have the biggest data center in the world, like the 3 gigawatts that India is trying to do. Are we going to do 1 gigawatt like France? We're going to do 100 megawatts like some of the other markets in Europe. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to need to establish a local company. And let's say the government's going to go, someone's going to have to say, where's that customer coming from? Let's say the government says, I will take up 25% of the compute, right? The other 75 or 30 or 80% or whatever has to come from somewhere else, right? And that's going to be government, that's going to be corporates and research facilities, et cetera. And then someone's going to have to figure out the financing. So either the government says, I'm going to finance all of it, or I'm going to finance part of it, and a partner needs to come in and finance the rest of it. So for the markets that, you know, that we work with at Frontier One, like as we said, across Asia and Middle East and Latin America, all of these markets, it's it's maybe a 5, 10 mega facility, right? It's 4,000 to 6, 7,000 GPUs. It's 100, $200 million. You know, that type of thing is very doable in those markets, right? So you put that together for them. You find who the right partner is. We really like working with Nebius, for instance, because they're very flexible and international. But like we find that right partner and and then there's the other elements, right? So um, you introduced us to those great guys in Italy who are looking at sovereign AI on rails, right? What's it?
Prem AI.
Prem AI, right? Great team, right? Spoke to them earlier today. Really smart, right? And they've cottoned on to, yeah, how do we do this for these markets at the smart way in the lower level? I spoke to another team earlier today who are building edge solutions. Um, so like competing with Nebius, but for remote locations, right, where power is low, sun is hot, dust, edge locations, right? So you got to think, okay, where is this thing going to be? What's the market? Who are the user cases? Who are the customers? And for governments, they've got it's really complicated to try and figure all that out. And so, and you're not going to go to McKinsey and EY. They're not going to have a clue either. So, you've got to go to the specialists and, so people like us who like know software, know infrastructure, know like how to do the financing, that type of approach is, I think, the right way to go about it. But we will see.
Yeah, it feels like the different governments are interested in AI because they have to be. We kind of established why it's not all right to just now all of a sudden keep doing things with the US as such a close partner. And folks are thinking, well, if we're going to be building out our AI capabilities, we should invest in our own country and our own AI capabilities as opposed to shipping off these different workloads or inference to a far away land. And even a lot of these examples that you're talking about, if it's inference, it's going to be much better the closer it is to you. So it makes a ton of sense that you would want to put up different data centers in different countries so that things can hopefully be faster and more enjoyable for the end user. I'm wondering about how you feel governments will change when they now bring online all of this AI capability.
It's really interesting. I mean, regulation and data protection and sovereignty and everything comes into that question for sure. Um, the question is, look, I think governments know that they can be more efficient deploying AI. They're not sure how often, but they know they can, right? And so let's take a very simple example. If I want to put AI models or whatever in or applications into my health system and make it more efficient. To do that, I got to be sure that that health data can go into a local model that's super secure. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to provide that access to that data to companies that are going to be and startups that are going to be building stuff to make my health system more efficient. So for instance, there's probably a local player that's working on digitizing health records, or a regional player. So that player needs to have access to that data, but it needs to be secure, right? And and the government needs to feel that I can provide that access on a secure basis. Now, it's not like I'm going to do everything that way. I'm going to be obviously using OpenAI and I'm doing others, but I need to be very sure that that data can be locked down and secured. And also need to have a local vector database, a local cybersecurity platform, a local model, right? That provides all that. I think governments are trying to figure all that out, but effectively what they really, at the very simplistic level, want to do is can I put AI securely into government and provide access to companies that want to do things in health or agriculture or whatever it is securely, and don't feel that my data is going to leak, because if it does leak, that's going to be on the front page of the news, and it's not going to be good for us.
It's funny that you mention, hey, governments want to do this, but don't necessarily know how. And not having sovereign AI to me feels like 100% a blocker on them iterating and trying things. So they can't figure out how until they start iterating. They try and put it in here, put it in there, realize, oh, maybe that's not really where the value is. So let's try again. You can't do any of that experimentation until you cover your bases and until you get that sovereign AI up and running. You're kind of SOL.
Totally, and I think that's absolutely right. Um, it's they know that that's a starter package, and let's just look at research, right? Universities and everything that need to do research, again, that's a lot of government-sponsored research, and again, you wanna keep that secure, right? I need to be sure that that data hasn't gone into someone else's model in, say, Silicon Valley somewhere, right? And I want to, have that aspect to it. I mean, a lot of people have seen sovereign AI as like government control, and it's not. It's government. It's trying to figure out, how do you like look after the data in the right way that is very important to you. I mean, your citizens' health records are very important to you. You cannot let that data go to another nation, and neither your defense, like, data, right? That's also extremely important to you. You cannot let that leak. So it's tricky, but it needs to be done. But then at the same time, you can't do everything. So you're gonna have these great startups and companies that probably local or regional that are gonna wanna work on the system, and you have to put that in place for them. You have to have the rails for them to do that, which is what, what's it, MAI. Yeah, which is what those guys are doing, which is really cool, and so I think, it's our job at Frontier One is to bring all that together and be the master builder, right, in these markets, and help them understand all those aspects, and also always keep on top of it and make sure best of breed is coming through the door.
I wanted to just zoom in and almost like push back on the medical data one for a second. The defense one, I think everyone 100% agrees. You want to be doing your defense data in your country, and that is without a doubt number one priority. The medical one, I often wonder if it's not better to get the more medical data, the better, because you're going to find
Yeah.
these random, very long tail type of diseases, and you get to see, well, where else is that happening? And it could be highly valuable for researchers. I It's also funny that you mentioned this because I was just listening to the Acquired podcast on My Chart, which is a company, I think it's Epic, the company, and they created this thing called Cosmos, and it anonymizes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data, patient data records. And then researchers are able to go and look at that. And even doctors are able to go and look at that. So, in that regard, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I will, go with that. So look, it's 2 aspects to it, right? Anonymized data for research purposes, 100%, no question. But the question is when, you know, if I'm going down to the NHS here and they're pulling up my record and they're trying to figure out, like, that's an internal NHS system which is accessing my record, and that absolutely needs AI because it's a disaster of a system, clearly, right? Because nobody, I mean, they sit there and go, and it's like, whatever, right? That's a different problem, right? So, so there's two parts to that problem. One is the research on anonymized data. No question, I need as much data as I can. But of course, the other question is the localized NHS equivalent is
Mhm.
accessing highly sensitive private data, and that's a different problem. So there are two problems to that.
I see what you're saying. So, it's more of this when the inference side of things or the execution of the workloads are happening, You don't want them getting, even if it is fully anonymized, it's better to keep that close to home.
Yeah, and especially if I'm going to be modernizing, let's say I'm modernizing the NHS here in the UK,
Mhm.
right?
God can only hope, huh?
Yeah, but exactly, right? But that, or anywhere else, right? Those
Yeah.
systems are old, right? They're 10, 20 years old in all of these markets, right? At least. And they radically need updating. And that's going to be a radically different way of doing things. And they're going to be doing modeling on that huge amount of data that they have that is not anonymized for that purpose, because they need to also use that internally. So it's a very different problem. Um, so that's the one I'm going to be referring to more here from a sovereign AI perspective. Anonymizing data from a research perspective, that's a different problem. Um, and yeah, I mean, give the research as much data as they can for sure.
Yeah.
But what do I do? So, for instance, can the AI, let's say I go in and get a body scan here at the NHS, right? And they use that data and they model that data against others, and they come back and they tell me X about me, right? That is very sensitive data that needs to be protected. So, but the people that are going to be developing that application need to access my data. So,
Yeah.
that's a different problem in a way.
Yeah, also, you have the Epic company in the US, but every country has their own Epic or a few different Epics that wanna be creating these ecosystems so that folks can be pushing forward in the progress area, and, I think I fall victim of this a little bit because I am American, of thinking that there is the US and then everybody else, and that's kind of, we don't think about that. Obviously, living outside of the US for so long, I recognize there's this great big world with a whole lot of people out there, and it needs these type of things too, these initiatives and all this stuff. And when I was in the Zurich Gen AI conference a few weeks ago, one thing that was top of mind for them in a few different talks that I saw was, hey, all this AI stuff is happening. How is Switzerland being part of it? And of course, Switzerland is traditionally very neutral. So for them, sovereign AI felt like a natural next step or a natural path to take. And it also helps that they can say, yeah, we're going to go invest in this project. I wonder if you see different countries or scenarios where maybe they want to invest in it, but like they don't understand, or is there just budget right now? Everyone understands that this is as important as possible.
I think it's a great question. I think taking a step back again, like what Trump has done is end globalization, right? And not just in trade, but in how things are built, right? Traditionally, a country would have been completely fine using a US company to do whatever they did, right? No more, right? He has turned everything to localization instead, and in some ways, incredibly, um, cut the foreign business development opportunities for a lot of US companies,
Mm.
which is incredible, right? And so, but on the other side, that means that a huge opportunities opened up for local, regional companies around the world. It's just transformed the landscape incredibly, right? So now Europe is going to go, I need as few US companies in my sovereign AI or banking facility as possible, right? And so I need local. And the local, suddenly these local, like it's so interesting. I mean, suddenly they're going to be, I need local companies for this and I need local companies for that, and all elements of the stack. There are some banks in Germany have said, like, I cannot have a US company in the stack, right? I can't even have GitHub. So like that's a huge, tremendous opportunity for companies around the world to suddenly become taking advantage of that. And that will start primarily in the finance and government sectors, because both finance, defense, and government will
Yeah.
suddenly go, we cannot We can't use US companies. We may not even be able to use a UK company. We have to use a European company. So, um, and UK is like, "Oh, we need to do this," and Saudi is, "Well, we're gonna need to do Saudi." I mean, it's just tremendously opening up the opportunity globally for local talent and local development of core AI functions just from the geopolitics of everything that's happened. I mean, Trump has literally suddenly woken up the world who was, like, pretty much reliant on US companies and US software to go, "Wow, wow, what do we do?" So, I mean, it's kind of at that level now, right? Everyone is a bit just at that conference that you were at. Everyone's like, "Well, what do we do?" And so, yeah, I mean, that's where we come in and go, "Okay, let's help you through this from a local level." There's gonna be tremendous opportunities. I think AI is truly going global, thanks in large part to Trump. So,
Yeah, he's great for your business. You gotta send him a thank you card
I
or
mean,
something.
100%. I mean, there are a lot of people that are in the, technology space who are going to be doing that now because
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Like, if I'm, let's say it just applies to so many things. If I'm if I'm a country and let's say there's this kind of rumor, that the F-35s, that if I buy an F-35, the US can switch them off, right? I mean, I mean, that's super interesting, right? Now, you
Yeah.
know,
Now
is
you
that
gotta look for a new provider,
is that
yeah.
a rumor, whatever, but it's entirely possible that the US could switch an F-35 off, right? So I've just spent $1 billion buying an F-35 and you can switch it off with a kill switch. I mean, like, that's really interesting, right? And he has, as we just saw from the Canadian election, like, completely transformed countries. Canada is now more nationalistic and more local than ever, and that is happening in many markets, and it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for AI developers and stuff all around the world.
Yeah. First off, let's just have a moment of silence for those engineers that have to work at the banks that don't allow GitHub, because poor folks out there,
Oh, you know,
they are gonna be going through hell and back. But the other
just
thing,
think about what they've been having to use instead. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what I'm thinking about. It's like, oh man, that's gonna be rough. But the other piece was around this idea of we've seen the US weaponize the dollar. And like you're saying, there's this jump or there's a step where they can weaponize the weapons that they've sold to other countries. So if you get on their bad side and they say, potentially they just turn off their jets that they sold to you, whether or not that's true or not, whatever, it doesn't matter because the thought has been planted into different governments and politicians' minds that they are making an effort to move away from the US as the supplier. But then if you extrapolate that forward, you can think about it in this frame of, well, what's going to stop them from weaponizing AI? And maybe today, with the use cases that we have, it isn't as strong of an argument, but potentially in 5 years or sooner or later, maybe it's 10 years, that could be a whole different environment that we are living in if we are as reliant on the US's AI ecosystem as we are on the dollar. Then if for some reason you get on Trump 3 or whoever the next president is on their bad side and they say, well, we're just going to turn off your AI, that is another way that it can be weaponized. So I fully see the other side of this story where it's like, yeah, we got to make sure that if AI is as transformational of a technology as most folks are saying it's going to be, whether or not it is, it's debatable 100%. I think there's a lot of early signals that it's going to be, but even if it isn't, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it per se. So you don't want the US to have that capability of just like being able to shut off your AI.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the US at the end of the day is just hyper focused on itself right now, and And that's fine, right? I mean, that's really fine. I do think that the Trump administration will gradually, you know, start to and is starting to realize that, maybe this is, things will change, right? So I
Mm.
do think it's just hyper focused on itself and just making sure that the US has the right resources and the right chips and everything that are available to it. And like it's going to go like we need the best chips, we need a lot of them, and we need to conserve them, right? And
Yeah.
that's the US is right completely. I think that um and that's like a lot of markets are doing that, right? China does exactly the same thing. So the US is allowed to do that as well. I think at the end of the day, you break the US out from the rest of the world, and that, as we said, like globalization for whatever reason is coming a bit to an end in a lot of ways, and localization is coming back again. And that means that by having a local, especially for something as important as AI, having a local deployment that I can rely on is important, right? And you're absolutely right. Can it, something, maybe they do switch it off, right? And that could have a huge impact because I have AI throughout my infrastructure, right? I mean, we just saw the power outage in Spain, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
what happens if AI is in the banking sector and it just suddenly, you know, collapses or takes over or. So
That's wild. I saw stuff that folks were saying they couldn't get cash out because there was no ATMs. They couldn't pay for anything because all of the credit card machines weren't working. And so effectively it was like, well, I guess I'm not going to do anything for a few hours.
yeah, that's wild, right? I mean, now that's an energy problem, which, comes back online. But again, what happens if I've got AI, heavily into my energy systems and everything? So
Yep.
it really has to be protected. And I, I do think that yes, you can make your own mistake nationally and you can fix it, but if you've got another actor considerably embedded into your AI local infrastructure, you need to be careful of that, right?
Yeah.
And that, the US isn't going to allow China to run their AI infrastructure, and neither should anyone allow anyone else to, right? I mean, like that's the localization of it when it comes to the government side, which is so important, I think, especially if you look at, energy and finance and where we could be in 5 to 10 years, where AI systems are AI agents and, potentially, you know, general intelligence is running these things, and we don't even have much control over them, and we're all gone to Skynet, which is not doesn't seem that far away now. Um, there is that potential of that famous scene in T2, right, when the guys are switching on Skynet without having any idea what it can possibly do.
Hmm.
That I think is going to be a lot of governments, and so
Hmm.
like you've got to be able to how you're going to implement that and control that, at least at a national level, is important.
Yeah. What are some of the other key players in this? I mean, you mentioned how you have to have the government's bought in, you have to have financiers, you almost want to be looking at the different tools that you can offer in these data centers too, because it's not just the straight hardware, you've got the software. Is there anybody else that I am missing?
So I think, you look at the stack. So, I mean, like, firstly, I've got to go, let's say I'm implementing, whether it's like I'm repurposing an existing data center, but let's say I'm building one from scratch. I've got to find the right power, I've got to find the right location. And, and also very importantly, before I build, I got to have the right customers. So I need to know before I'm committing $1 billion or even $100 million of GPUs, who is the customer for this, right? So the government or someone has to say, I'm going to take the offtake for that. Now, in France, Macron twisted everybody's arms and said, okay, all these corporates are going to come together and we're going to all contribute and say, basically put $1 billion worth of compute offtake spend on the table. I think that's very smart. And that's a really good way of doing it. So I do think the other players are going to be big corporates in local markets. He will work in tandem with the government to do that. For instance, in Argentina, you know, the government there has been really, really strong that they want to make Argentina a local AI center, and the corporates are being brought in to figure out the usage of it. Because at the end of the day, who's going to use it? How's it going to go? Right. So I do think that's another big player is the corporates themselves and figuring out how they will interact with systems locally.
Mm-hmm.
And the other players are going to be local players on the ground who can build local applications. Great. A lot of people, I'm sure, in the MLOps community, um, it's really interesting. I mean, you think where I think is it's so interesting for a lot of markets, instead of just being a little outsourced team of some big US company, the opportunity is to build local and build something and then potentially regionally and keep going. We've seen in the Middle East, there's a lots of great regional players who do things in the Middle East, you know, because of different requirements, not least language. But so how does that come together? It's really interesting.
Do you feel like that leads to a world of more quote unquote lifestyle businesses where you get smaller teams, they have smaller markets, but it's less venture backed or less fundable because they're not going to go and conquer the world and there's not that infinite TAM?
It's a great question. I mean, we've obviously been talking about that opportunity, and I think it certainly enables so the tools that are available for everybody now. We can spin things up faster with smaller teams,
Yeah.
and we can use tools to run things. Right, we can have agents running customer service, and we don't need to pay $10,000 to some team, some group of people who are going to do customer outreach for us. We could probably use agents much more effectively now.
Yeah.
So I think people can spin things up and prototype things much, much faster. They can come together in little teams to do things locally much faster and solve local problems. And those local problems can go regional, right? I mean, I'm a partner in a great fund that is out of Oman in the UAE, and a couple of those companies, even on somewhere as small and as tight as Oman, have gone regional just because they solved a particular problem that just works regionally, right? And gradually scale it out. And now they can do it faster. And one of those is in the health sector. And um, so, yeah, I really think that's going to be the case. I think it's a change, right? Instead of, as we talked about beforehand, like, you know, the the old venture model of giving $5 million or $10 million to a company and saying, "Hey, let 9 months, 12 months, produce something," and that's MVPs are great. Just limited functionality, just get it out there. Like that doesn't work anymore. Like
Yeah.
someone else can prototype something so fast with a lot of functionality and a lot of features and test it and roll it out faster. And I think that's really exciting. Um, and I think that's where the power of like what the MLOps community has is really powerful. Like that's a group of very great people who are in the AI and ML space and who are thinking about these things and prototyping these things. And they're not on LinkedIn. And if they are, they're not going to be really sharing their life experiences on LinkedIn, right? So they're doing that in a community like MLOps. And so how does that come together and build cool new things and prototypes, I think is the next kind of logical step for communities like you guys.
And I know that we had talked about too, these traditional ways going back to that idea of, hey, I've got to go now and raise a bunch of money, go all in on my idea, and spend the next 9 months launching it, bringing it to market, et cetera, et cetera. That has been a bit turned on its head where you can, in a way, you can have your job at your big fancy company, making all that cash, but still you can be moonlighting on this project, which has the potential of like the iteration speed, I think, is what is different because you've always been able to moonlight. You've always been able to have you working at your big company. You are now moonlighting for something, and then you bring it to market or you put it out there. But the ability to have that feedback loop be tightened is the coolest thing ever. And we're seeing it so much with a lot of these bottoms up companies like the Lovables and the Cursors, where they have such a product led growth motion that they can get to a gigantic scale with the small teams because they don't have any sales and marketing teams.
Spot on. I mean, look at Lovable, right? Another great Swedish, like Spotify, right? When Spotify started, you know, like in Sweden, right? You're going to take on the music market from Sweden. And yes, they did completely, right? And Lovable's done the same thing. Like, because of the ability to scale things faster and smarter and the hyper efficiency focus of Swedes is great. I used to live in Sweden and it's amazing. I don't know how they do it, 6 weeks off in the year, work from sort of 8 in the morning till 4 in the evening, 4 in the afternoon, but still like IKEA,
Yeah.
Lovable, Spotify, everything, right? But I think the point is that you're absolutely right, right? Is that companies can prototype and spin things faster, and I can do like, and I would be, if someone's at a big company and they're like a little cog in the dev team, and it's really kind of a bit boring, and they do the same thing over and over again with a little bit more next, in a couple of months, you're going to be looking at other things to do. But those other things to do now are infinitely more interesting and infinitely more scalable and faster to prototype and get out there. But also, I don't need to leave the day job until I know it's working. And then suddenly
Yeah.
it's working. And then, oh, wow, okay, maybe I'm going to make a jump now. Um, and same as a VC is going to be like, I think VCs need to change their idea of what it is, right? I don't need to have 20, 30 people all doing something before I invest in them. I need to have like five very smart people who've launched something, and I don't care how they got it out the door. I don't really care, right? I just know they got it out the door and it's really cool and it's scaling. And I'm going to I'm going to invest into those five people. I don't care where they are or where they are, but I'm going to invest into them. That's a different story. And I think VCs have to change the way they're approaching the market.
No, going back to the sovereign AI for a second, because one lingering question that I have is how you see regions cooperating. Specifically, we have the EU.
Yeah.
It is very friendly in a way, but you have been mentioning, hey, France is doing this on their own. They're building their sovereign AI system very much for them. I know that Germany has talked about, actually, I think Germany's doing something cool where they're taking old factories and they're trying to spin up data centers with them in the old factories because the old factories are now defunct. But they're like, well, the structure's still there. It's actually a big space. It would be perfect here. Whole lot of GPUs. How do you see the interoperability of the countries? Maybe we'll start with Europe, but then go towards, like you were saying, in the Middle East, there's these companies that will spin up on top of the structure and it starts locally, then goes regionally. Do you feel like these joint partnerships and the data centers are going to be only a specific country thing, or is it going to be like that more regional thing? And how does that play? How does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, we don't know yet, but we can surmise that, let's say France builds that $1 billion facility or even a $5 billion facility. I do not think that enough customers are in France for that type of facility. What I mean is there's not enough usage in France for that facility. And I think France will then go, hey, let's make this available to the rest of Europe. Um, and maybe just carve out, some racks. And we're going to need to give the ability that, for some hyperlocalization on some of these racks. But yes, I do think so. And then is there a EU sovereign AI? Of course, the EU is going to do it. I mean, that's
The
I'm
most
sure
regulated sovereign AI you can think
100%. There's
of.
some guys in Brussels dreaming about this right now. And is that going to work? Well, yeah, let's see.
Another
But
question. Yeah.
but they're certainly going to try, and they're going to have some sort of European AI. But nobody really even knows what the definition of that is. And the problem, of course, in the EU is it's so overregulated that anytime I try to launch something, I've got to check so many hoops that by the time I launch it, it's out of date.
Mhm.
So I think there's that vast problem of regulation needs to get solved in the EU first as well. I think other markets, have an opportunity to not be so hyper-regulated and cooperate on a regional basis without the huge regulations that the EU throws in things that just stifle every innovation. Um,
Yeah.
so I think you've got a clear opinion about that. But yeah, so I think it's different, right? Markets are going to be different. Like, how does LATAM, collaborate? Africa, right? Asia, like there will be collaboration for sure.
Yeah, I like that idea of there's going to be excess demand, so it's going to get sold. And it feels like potentially there's going to be that in these Middle Eastern countries too. And so it's interesting to think, wow, I imagine a world where even if you're not fully bought in, maybe you're not doing something so sensitive that you need the sovereign AI. It's just me, app developer in the EU, and I go on the streets looking for some GPU capacity. If there are a lot of different data centers that have been built up around me, that's just going to make my cost go way down.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely. And I think that's going to happen. And everything, of course, at the end of the day comes down to power. So, let's take something like Bhutan. Bhutan
Mhm.
suddenly has become incredibly interesting because it's got 30 gigawatts of potential hydropower, of which it's only used about two, right?
Wow.
Is so much hydropower. So does Bhutan, if they put a major data center in the south of Bhutan where they're building the new mindfulness city, we could have a mindfulness data center down there. But I mean, the point is their power is so cheap. And so, I mean, they could be a regional player just from the source of power they have, right? So, El Salvador is looking at building Bitcoin City in a volcano, right? Using geothermal, right? Hopefully extinct volcano. Um, and now maybe Bitcoin City is, you know, I don't know. Well, today it's probably a pretty good idea. Last week it probably wasn't. So who knows, right? But there's a little bit more, um, surety around AI, right? So they're looking at thinking, okay, should we build a data center there, right? And could that be regional? Like, there's a lot of thinking that goes into it.
Yeah.
But I do think, yes, there will be a degree of localization and regional support, a lot of driven by which country has the lowest cost power.
And it feels like, from what I've understood, you have to have the governments that sponsor this in a way. Otherwise, you're
To a certain degree, because I, as a hyperscaler or whatever, or BlackRock or anything, I'm not going to put $1 billion into building an AI data center if I don't know who's going to be using it and who's going to pay for the usage. So yes, to a certain degree, the government does need to put in, like maybe they say I take 20 or 30% of the offtake and guarantee it, which means that, yeah, okay, now I feel more comfortable about financing this.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we haven't hit on?
Man, I could talk about things I could talk about anything really. I mean, right, whatever really, to be honest, of issues. But I think today's topic has been exactly the key thing, which is really for me, going back to it again, AI is truly going global. We saw that with DeepSeek, how that came out of nowhere, and and surprised the Chinese government as much as it surprised anybody else, right? And where did that come from? It came from a hedge fund, which was looking to do better modeling and decided to build this thing. And wow, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of things that are um, going to expand AI globally, and the opportunities are going to be tremendous. And we're just seeing the start of that.
You know what I wanted to talk to you about for a second is take me back to the Siri days, pre-Apple acquisition. What and how did you even think? Like, give me the scenario because I think it's a fascinating story on how Siri got rocking and rolling. It was a bunch of researchers, right?
It's a bunch of researchers out of SRI International. And it was really like, you know, um, I have to say, my boss at Horizon Ventures, she's incredibly, incredibly smart, and she saw the opportunity. She was thinking about data and AI way before anybody else was.
Wow.
And it was together with, and this is out of Hong Kong, right? And
Yeah.
she's so smart. And the others that were in it was Menlo and Morgenthaler, and like kind of older VCs from the 90s that knew deep tech, right? And were like, deep tech is still always going to be important. In those days, everything is just about social network scaling. That's where all the money was going. But Menlo, Morgenthaler, and us were like thinking a lot longer term about what are the impacts of deep tech. And this is like deep tech wasn't even a thing. Like, people aren't really talking about it, right? Um, and these guys, led by Adam Chaya, who's super, super smart and just a great guy. I'd been working for 10 years in SRI on AI, right? And um, the opportunity came to do something and spin it out. And look, it was so under the radar. We launched in February 2010 on the App Store when the App Store was very small, and it did sort of help you with reservations and cinema bookings and things. And
Uh-huh.
there was one also, the other guys that were very forward sighting was Verizon. There was a guy called Ed Ruth at Verizon who was very forward thinking and had done a deal between Verizon and the Siri team so that Siri would launch there first.
Wow.
And it was so interesting. And so basically, what happened then was it launched in the store, and then Steve Jobs saw it. And about 2 days later, the founders got a call, which they didn't believe. But obviously, it turned out to be Steve Jobs. And they went into the Jobs reality distortion field completely. And it was great. Like 4 weeks later, it was sold 200 million. And
That was fast.
it was crazy. And the amazing team. Unfortunately, Steve got sick, and Siri got lost internally for a while. But the team then went on and built amazing things and for Samsung and then Airbnb. And it's just, I mean, they've just an incredible team that have continually innovated in AI constantly with new companies. Um, but yeah, back in those days, I mean, Steve was, his Jobs was so far ahead of the thing. He saw it, but I have to say, my boss at Horizons and those guys at Menlo and Morgenthaler also saw it, right? They saw it way above it. People were just, they would just had that long-term deep tech focus.
Yeah.
And none of them were bankers, right? They weren't finance guys. So they saw it from a technology perspective, not from a finance perspective. And no
Yeah,
one in
ROI was
Siri
not a question.
or DeepMind, when they
Mhm.
pitched, were like, we have no idea where the revenue's coming from. None. And in those days, that was novel, right? So no VC's doing it. Like hardly any VC would do it. Like no VC was investing in DeepMind in Europe in the early days, right? Because it was like, well, where's the revenues? We don't know. Like, we're just going to build the best AI engine on the planet. Well, why would you do that? I mean, like, so that kind of question, like, comes down to it. And I think, um, again, coming back to it, I think there is, again, a huge shakeout going on where a lot of investors work very traditionally, right? And there's a new way of things going to happen where people are going to spin things up really quick, and jumping on that really quick is going to be the key. So, yeah, watch this space.